G'day friends, welcome to day 17 of Inktober 2018. The prompt for today's piece is... Why have I pulled a blank? I just read it. Cherry Blossom Monkey Dolls Help Me Mind My Neighbor's Trolls. There's a lot going on in there, and since there was a lot going on, I decided to keep it quite simple in its approach. You can see I even broke out the ruler today, just because I've been struggling with composition issues, and I thought, well, since I knew that I wanted the monkeys to be quite large, and Daisy to be this, like, you know, almost like simple little drawing right in the center of the page, I wanted to make sure that I was doing it in the center of the page, because if I have to eyeball stuff like that, it just kind of escapes me. I think one of the other issues I have is that, if you can see as I draw on an angle. It's never typical that I can have a drawing straight on in front of me and have it, you know, like perfectly aligned to flat face me, and so a lot of the time my drawings tend to veer off to the bottom right hand corner because the perspective that I draw at is on a weird angle, and sometimes I will try and put the drawing really facing flat onto me when I have to draw something straight up and down vertical, and I want it to run parallel to the sides of the page. But for the most part, if I'm not drawing any kind of straight line that runs up and down, I do try to keep the page tilted off to the side, or in a place that's comfortable for my hand to draw. I don't know if you've noticed this before when you're drawing or illustrating. There's a way that your wrist likes to do certain lines, and we're all going to be kind of different depending on what feels comfortable for us. So there are strokes that I'll do that I like to do them a certain way, and I will kind of move the page, as opposed to move my whole body around it. So I tend to do this, you know, I'm always like shifting the page and adjusting it to suit the way that my wrist likes to draw. And as I'm explaining it, I feel like this is not the video to demonstrate it the best. And that's not because I wasn't really caring about it, but to be honest, when I'm drawing something really simplistic and there can be a little bit of a quirk to it, I don't mind so much. It's more like when I'm drawing buildings, or especially legs. I feel like legs is something I always have to reset myself for, get the page lined up properly, and really try and eyeball it off to the side of the page to keep them vertical, because a lot of the time my legs will just wander off to nowhere. So, not my legs personally, but the legs that I'm drawing. Anyway, I'm going to get into some of the questions that I've refound from my Instagram post ages ago. Not anything crazy today, just some like random ones that I'll touch on. I will say thank you again for listening to me whinge about being run down yesterday. Got some good advice in the comments section. Also, did anyone notice YouTube went down yesterday? I legit was laughing my head off at the irony that I was sitting there thinking how amazing my career, like this can be my career, and that I get to choose this to be a business that I get to work in, and how much fun that is. And then literally YouTube crashed as I was uploading my video, and it was down for about an hour and a half, 2 hours or something. I am super curious to know why and how that happened. But because Instagram was down last month, wasn't it? I remember being on Instagram and that whole thing crashed. So I was just laughing at the irony that I was just so happy and so grateful, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, time for a career change. YouTube doesn't work anymore. Which kind of leads into one of the questions that I got. Amazing segue. I didn't bring it up for that reason at all. This is just pure luck. But would I ever consider having a standalone website for content, or for I guess selling my products as well, but I guess just like a standard jlbcreative.com. I have considered it before. The only thing that really stops me from going there is, I mean, there's a few reasons. One is time and money. It does cost to set that whole process up, and I am not very efficient when it comes to creating a website. I know there are website builders out there like Wix or Squarespace, and I know a lot of people have discount codes to that. I always hear a good plug for Squarespace online, but I don't see a real need for it right now, just because a lot of the following that I tend to engage with the most is on Instagram and on Facebook and also YouTube. So I feel like the website wouldn't be really where it wouldn't be the hub of information for people, because it's not it's not somewhere you're gonna accidentally wander onto, or it's like there'd be no foot traffic there. Say when I'm selling on Etsy, people can accidentally wander into my store, you know, digitally, because if they've searched for something, I might pop up in a search, you know, like as a recommended product or something. Now, people aren't just going to fall into my my standalone website for no reason. They'll have to specifically search for that, and so I just think, as far as selling goes, it's just makes more sense for me to pay a few of the extra fees and get a lot more foot traffic on Etsy. So I haven't found a problem with that. Also, the integration with mailing, having Etsy do that and being able to get a reduced rate from mailing means that I can pass on that reduced rate to my customers. Having my own platform for mailing is just going to be like another expense, like to integrate that into the website, and also an expense that I would have to add into the product costing. It's all boring stuff at the end of the day, but money is one of those factors that I do look at as far as building my own website, and you know, hosting the domain name and actually paying for the subscription, whatever website I would choose to build. It would be quite an expense and a big lengthy process to go through. It'd be very time consuming. So I'm not going to say never, but for right now I don't notice a specific need for that. Also, when I was thinking about online courses, I wondered if that would be a good time to have my own website so I could integrate courses on the website and wouldn't be using a secondary host for that. But it is still something that I'm looking into, because as with owning your own website, or not owning it, but operating it, especially when you're starting to take money from people on that, you also have payment merchants that get involved, like PayPal, or you can integrate, you know, like a kind of payment merchant. I feel like you're a lot more liable for problems in that respect, whereas on Etsy, if there's a problem with payment processing, it's kind of up to Etsy to deal with it. So I find that I get to absolve myself of a lot of that stress and responsibility in that sense. You know, if it happened on my website and it was the payment merchant that I chose, a lot of that responsibility would fall onto me, and I honestly just don't feel prepared to take that on, because I don't really understand a lot of it yet. So I'm absolutely not going to say never, and if there's anything ever specific, like I know in the question it mentioned, like, just to say my favorite art supplies, like I could have a blog or something. I feel like I'm always open to doing that on the Facebook group as far as posting stuff like that goes. So yeah, I think there's always a way to get what you probably want to get. I do think that having a standalone website would be good for a few reasons, but I just don't see it turning into the central hub of information, if you will. So those are the reasons I kind of haven't done that yet, but I have looked into it in the past, and I will look into it again probably next year. Just obviously no promises on that front. Which drawing took you the longest? What could you have done differently? Oh goodness, I don't even know. They all kind of take about 50 minutes to an hour and a half. Some of them have been a lot quicker, and there's a dry brush technique, I think, that's coming up tomorrow, which was very quick, and probably one of my favorite pieces as well, go figure. It's so funny because some of the pieces that take me the longest, it's not because they're any more detailed, it's because I take a long time pausing when I'm struggling. So I feel like the length of the piece happening isn't really, like, how good the piece is isn't dependent upon how long I spend on it. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. The longer I spend on something is typically because I've run into a lot more issues and I'm having a lot more trouble with it. But for the most part, I'll generally sit down in any respect for about an hour to create something, because that's just, I think it's kind of my attention span with one thing. I don't typically go longer than an hour. I have done marathons before, but even then, I would typically go from one drawing to another, or one piece to another. I don't know. I think back in the day, I used to spend hours and hours and hours on one particular thing, but as I learned to let go of achieving a certain result and actually just enjoying the process, I find that most processes just take about an hour to enjoy. So it's not, I don't know, the length of time, it is a good question, but I couldn't tell you specifically what took me the longest. I just know that they're usually about 50 minutes to an hour, and if they're longer, it's typically because I struggled with them. Sometimes you can see if I've really spent some time on something, like if it's very involved and it's very detailed, or there's a lot of mixed media going on. Heating it, like drying the paint, also takes a long time. So if something's a bit more of a heavy paint application or ink application, that typically takes an extra bunch of time because, you know, it takes about a minute to heat set whatever's on the page. But if I have to do it 14 times, that's like an extra 14 minutes to something, which if you're spending 50 on it, I mean, if you factor that in, it's really hard to tell. But I'm sorry if I couldn't answer that eloquently enough, but I just don't know. Oh, I've got to move on to a different page. Where do I find this? Are you completely done with Patreon or just taking a breather? So I am done with playtest Patreon. That was my introduction to it. It was my getting a feeler for it. It was a whole playtest experience, which is a really nice way for everyone to enter in that without a lot of expectation. Because there are some people that are very established in the field already, and I just felt like I didn't want to hype up anyone's expectations of what I was able to offer, not understanding the platform that I was about to enter. So as far as the playtest goes, that is completely finished, but I'm just kind of taking a breather until I figure out what I want to do next on Patreon. It's still unclear to me whether I want to go about the next Patreon adventure a different way. It won't be called Playtest Patreon because it wouldn't be a playtest the second time, but I do still like the idea of doing it in, 3-month blocks or perhaps an intensive month if it was something specific. It's something that floated around in my head that is not going to happen, so I feel terrible for telling you, but please don't hate me. I was going to bring it back for Christmas and do an advent, so it was going to be 25 Christmas videos, one a day leading you into Christmas, but I just did not have the time to factor in creating all of that before December actually started. This taking me right into November, and also having a holiday in November, there was just no way it was going to happen. So I knew I could probably do like day of videos or something, but I like to dedicate a good amount of time to getting the content to a certain quality. I don't want to just be throwing them up there because I have a deadline to meet, and I knew that would be what happened if I did decide to go into the Advent. But hopefully next year, who knows? I do like the idea of an Advent on Patreon. Maybe I was going to say Lent. We'll come back for the Easter season on Patreon. I would like to do it again. Who knows? It might just come back next summer as like a summer camp offering or themed something specific, but definitely not looking to join Patreon long term. And when I do get around to doing the big recap video, I have to be honest with you, I just don't feel comfortable getting in front of the camera right now. And now that I got run down, like before it was because I felt like I gained a lot of weight and I hadn't had a shave or a shower or a haircut for about 50 days. I was really struggling with getting over that vanity aspect, and now it's just because I feel run down and I don't want everyone to see how awful I look, because I just imagine someone looking at when I started the adventure and then fast forwarding to the last video, the big recap, and seeing that like it looked like I'd been through a war zone or something. So I will endeavor to get on that pretty quickly. It is not something I'm looking to do long term though, and it pretty much goes back into that Q&A I ran my mouth about last year when I was doing a journal with me just talking about Patreon Q&A. It's just because I don't see the benefit for the growth that I want to have, and it really did put a big it was a big ask to be able to keep up with a lot of the accessible content that I was creating for Instagram and YouTube as well. Mostly YouTube. Instagram lives aren't really a huge thing to to pre-plan or anything, but as far as getting YouTube videos up as well, it was a lot to factor in and a lot to do, especially with the Happy Mailer tier, and that is probably one of the parts that I enjoyed the most, even though it took a lot of the work. So I don't want to have another Patreon experience where I don't have the Happy Mailer tier, because I think it's a really nice way to get a tangible piece of that experience. So yeah, I still mixed thoughts about it, but as far as long-term Patreons, I could not do it. I admire the people that do. I just think it still didn't seem to work when I factored it into everything else I had going on. And so just taking a breather until I know how it's going to come back. If you have any suggestions for a certain season or a certain reason to bring it back, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Especially anyone that was a part of the playtest. How would you bring it back and for how many months? if that's a question you want to answer. I'm going to throw the Q&A right back on you today. Alright, I have the last hashtag Little Raven Inktober flip coming your way after this video, and that will be the end of that. There's also one that's a music only flip, so you have an option there to just see the whole thing flipped or to hear my final thoughts about that whole project. But until then, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.